The headline version of baseball is for everyone. This isn't that. Streak Plot Scout goes below the surface. The 40-man decisions, the prospect ETAs, the draft implications hiding inside yesterday's transactions. Built for the people who understand that the game is won before it's played. Let's get into it. The number that defines this scouting conversation is not 2.40, it's 5.85. And the gap between them is the entire story. Michael McGreevy is posting a 2.40 ERA over 56 innings with a 5.85 xERA underneath it. That is a 3.45 run gap. To put that in context, his career average gap, and this is important because McGreevy does historically outperform his underlying metrics, his career average gap is negative 0.92. So some ERA to xERA separation is normal for him. Some of it is real skill, above average command, sequencing intelligence, the ability to generate soft contact in certain counts. But the current separation of 3.45 runs is 2.53 runs beyond even his own established baseline. That delta is not sustainable, and I want to explain exactly why from a tools perspective. The velocity tells the story before anything else. McGreevy is sitting 91.4 miles per hour this season. That is down 1.6 miles per hour from last season. A mile-and-a-half velocity drop is not nothing, and in the context of a pitcher who already lives at the lower end of the starter velocity band, it is a meaningful change. When a pitcher at 93 drops to 91.4, his margin for error on the periphery of the zone collapses. Pitches that were just off the plate and generated chases at 93 become hittable at 91.4 because hitters can sit longer and still catch up. The chase rate this season is 28.4%. That's functional but not dominant, and it's consistent with a pitcher whose stuff is no longer generating the late movement that forces hitters to commit early. The contact quality numbers are what concern me most. Hard hit rate against is 41.1%. That is elevated. Barrel rate against is 10.7%. That number is the one I'd circle in a scouting report and underline twice. A 10.7 barrel rate means hitters are making their best contact against McGreevy at a rate that, over a full season, produces a lot of extra base hits. 7 home runs in 56 innings, a 1.12 HR/9, is already telling you the barrel rate is translating. Exit velocity against at 89.0 miles per hour is below average for the category. That creates a visual illusion that the contact quality is manageable. But barrel rate and hard hit rate together are showing you a pitcher who is allowing well-struck balls. The exit velocity average is being pulled down by the soft contact on the other side of the distribution, masking the damage at the top. The ERA is 2.40 because the strand rate and sequencing have cooperated. Strand luck has held. Balls in play have found gloves. That is real, and it is also inherently temporary. StatCast-based ERA estimators project regression. The FIP of 4.23 is the most honest snapshot of his current peripherals. The WHIP of 0.99 looks excellent, and it is, but WHIP is a rate stat that doesn't capture quality of contact, only quantity of base runners. A pitcher with a 0.99 WHIP and a 10.7 barrel rate is threading a needle that will eventually stop threading. Now, the important counter-argument. McGreevy is a 45 FV arm whose carrying skill has never been raw stuff. He's a command-first right-hander. The 5.9 strikeout rate per 9 is consistent with a pitch-to-contact profile, not a swing-and-miss profile. His walk rate of 1.9 per 9 is genuinely good. That's a plus command grade in action. His sequencing intelligence is real. These are not phantom skills. They are skills that help him outperform xERA in any environment. But a command-first pitcher at 91.4 miles per hour, with an elevated barrel rate, and a velocity that is trending in the wrong direction, is a pitcher with a shrinking margin. The command has to be exceptional to compensate for below-average stuff, and the barrel rate says the contact quality is deteriorating despite it. Something in the arsenal, likely the fastball losing its edge, is allowing hitters to barrel up with more frequency than the command history would predict. The comparable that comes to mind is early career Kyle Hendricks. Command-first right-hander, below-average velocity, lives on sequencing and deception. Hendricks managed to sustain well because the deception was elite, and the changeup command was a legitimate plus-plus pitch that generated weak contact consistently. The question for McGreevy is whether he has that one carrying secondary that can be an out pitch at 91 miles per hour when the fastball is merely a strike rather than a weapon. If the answer is yes, there's a sustainable floor here. If the answer is no, the regression is going to be severe. The 56-inning sample is real enough to evaluate the tools. It is not large enough to feel comfortable projecting the ERA forward. The xERA and barrel rate are telling you the same thing from two different directions. The contact quality is ahead of what the ERA reflects, and it will catch up. Career context matters here as well. McGreevy is in a walk year at $800,000 AAV. He came into 2026 with a 4.42 ERA from 2025. The 2.40 this season is not a continuation of a trend. It is a departure from it, in a favorable direction, at a time when the underlying metrics say the departure is not structurally supported. That combination, favorable surface result, unfavorable underlying data, contract year, velocity decline, is the textbook definition of a sell-high window that is closing. Floor projection, a fifth starter innings eater profile, 150 to 160 innings, ERA in the mid-4 range when the strand rate normalizes, with command keeping him in games even when stuff isn't sharp. That is a useful major league arm. He survives, he pitches, he does not help you win a playoff series. Ceiling projection. If the velocity stabilizes and he finds a genuine out pitch, a plus changeup, a cutter with two-plane movement, there's a number 3 starter in there for a 50 to 60 game window. The ceiling requires tools emerging that have not yet shown up in the profile with consistency. Watch the barrel rate over the next 6 starts. If it stays above 10% while the ERA starts to drift upward, you are watching the regression begin in real time. If the barrel rate drops and the ERA holds, there is a real skill component here worth reassessing. Right now, the tools say the ERA is living on borrowed time, and the velocity trend says the margin is not growing, it's shrinking. A 6.86 ERA in a walk year tells one story. A 3.96 FIP tells another. My job is to figure out which story is true and what the physical evidence actually says. With Lance McCullers Jr., the answer is uncomfortable for everyone involved, and it doesn't fit cleanly into either narrative. McCullers is 32 years old, 11 years into a major league career that began in 2015. His ERA this season is 6.86. His xERA is 4.39. His FIP is 3.96. That 2.5 run gap between ERA and xERA is significant. It suggests some of what you're seeing on the surface is sequencing and strand rate, not pure contact quality. The underlying metrics say this is not a 6.86 pitcher. I'll give him that. But here's what I won't give him, the HR9 rate. McCullers is allowing home runs at 1.61 per 9 innings this season. His career average is 0.92. That's not a one-season blip. The trend line on his HR/9 has been climbing for multiple years now. When a pitcher's homer rate increases steadily over time, you look for a physical explanation. And with McCullers, the physical explanation is not subtle. He's an 11-year veteran who has had significant injury history throughout his career. The Tommy John surgery, the missed time, the workload restrictions, all of it is documented. What I want to look at as a scout is what that history does to the arsenal over time. Specifically, the curveball. McCullers built his reputation on one of the nastiest curveballs in the American League, a pitch that could drop off a table and generate ground balls at an elite rate when the command was on. That pitch was his identity. When the curveball loses shape, or when a pitcher becomes less willing to throw it in fastball counts because the command feel isn't there, the entire approach shifts. Hitters sit fastball more often. The fastball to curveball sequencing that made him dangerous becomes predictable. And predictable in a fastball count to a major league hitter means home runs. The hard hit rate against is sitting at 50.5% this season. That number is not a disaster. It's elevated but not outlier territory. The barrel rate against is 8.6%, which is more concerning. When you combine a rising barrel rate with a rising HR/9 trend, you're looking at a pitcher whose pitch mix or pitch quality is no longer generating the weak contact it once did. Exit velocity against is sitting at 91.5 miles per hour average. That's real contact being made. The chase rate at 27.3% is the other number I keep coming back to. Chase rate tells you how much the pitcher is controlling the edges of the zone and getting hitters to expand. A 27% chase rate is below average. It suggests the pitch shape or command isn't generating the movement that forces hitters out of the zone. For a power curveball pitcher like McCullers, that number should be higher if the breaking ball is functioning as an out pitch. Now let me give the counter-argument its fair hearing. The FIP of 3.96 is legitimate. The strikeout to walk profile when healthy is still functional. 39 innings is a small sample. The ERA gap is real and statistically meaningful. The xERA of 4.39 says there's a version of this season that looks a lot better by September if the sequencing normalizes. But here's the scout's concern that transcends the numbers. McCullers is on pace for significantly fewer innings than his career average of roughly 90 per season. He's averaging 115 pitches per start, which is not an elevated workload by itself, but in the context of his injury history and the fact that his production has already declined, ERA up from 6.51 last season, continuing a multi-year upward trend, the workload sustainability question is real. This is a pitcher whose peak was genuine. The 2017 and 2019 postseason performances showed you what a healthy McCullers with a functioning curveball could do. But peak McCullers and 2026 McCullers are separated by years of injury, surgery, and the natural degradation that comes from a body that has been asked to absorb significant physical stress. The comparable I keep coming back to for this stage of a career is Rich Hill circa 2022 to 2023. Left-hander, single dominant pitch, career built on the ability to generate weak contact and chase. When the curveball or equivalent pitch loses the last few degrees of movement, the underlying numbers start to trend in the direction McCullers is showing right now. Hill managed to find a floor as a back-end arm with careful usage. McCullers has a similar path available, but only if the stuff holds at some functional level and the command stabilizes. 4 projection. A fifth starter or bulk reliever role, providing 120 to 140 innings of 4 to 4.5 ERA baseball when healthy, with persistent injury risk limiting availability. That's still a major league pitcher. That's still useful. Ceiling projection from where he sits right now. A recaptured mid-rotation presence posting a 3.8 to 4.2 ERA over 160 innings if the curveball command returns and the HR/9 regresses toward his career norms. I think the ceiling projection requires more physical optimism than the current data justifies. The ERA will improve. The xERA and FIP tell me that much, but the home run rate is the structural concern, and structural concerns don't disappear when strand rate normalizes. Watch the curveball usage percentage and the swing and miss rate on that pitch specifically. That's your signal for whether there's a real second half of the season here, or whether the surface level improvement is just sequencing catching up to the mean. McCullers is not finished. He is, however, different than he was. And for a pitcher in a walk year, different is the most expensive thing you can be. Let's start with the tool that matters most here, and it's not the one that just went on the shelf. Corbin Burnes is done for 2026. Tommy John surgery, 60-day IL, UCL involvement confirmed. That's the event. As a scout, I'm not going to spend much time on Burnes right now. I've seen that arm, I know what it was, and the rehab timeline is what it is. What I want to talk about is what a rotation hole of this magnitude does to a 45 FV arm sitting in AA, because that's where this story actually lives. Daniel Egan, right-handed starter, currently at AA, FV 45, 8th in the Arizona org, medium risk profile. ETA was penciled in as 2027. Let's talk about why that date just got a lot more flexible. The fastball is the carrying tool, and the reason this conversation is even happening. Egan is operating 93 to 95, and the delivery is what scouts describe as downhill, high three-quarter slot that creates natural plane and extension through the zone. That's a 50 present grade on the heater with a legitimate 80 ceiling if the body fills out and the velo ticks as he moves into his physical prime. That's not a projection I throw around loosely. When you have a downhill fastball with that kind of ceiling band, you're talking about a pitch that can miss bats at the highest level without elite spin because of the approach angle alone. Hitters at the big league level struggle to lift a pitch that's already working downhill before it crosses the plate. Now command. That's where the conversation gets honest. Egan is sitting at a 45 present grade, and that's not a knock. It's where most mid-rotation starters live at AA. But 45 is not a finished product in terms of zone control. What I'd want to see before accelerating this timeline aggressively is how he handles a lineup that's seen him twice. Can he spot the fastball to both sides of the plate late in counts? Does the command grade hold when he's working from the stretch? Those are the questions that separate a back-end arm from a legitimate middle-of-the-rotation piece. The risk profile is labeled medium, and I think that's accurate given where the command lives. The ceiling is real. A downhill 93 to 95 fastball with secondary development can absolutely profile as a 3 or 4 starter in a playoff rotation. But rushing a 45 command arm from AA into a contending team's rotation carries real risk, both for the player's development arc and for the organization's 2026 playoff odds. Let me put Burnes in context for a moment, because the durability flag matters here. 4 of his 8 professional seasons have ended with significantly below average innings totals. This is not a player whose workload history suggests he was going to give Arizona 180 innings anyway. The rotation math in Arizona was already fragile before the UCL news. Now the Diamondbacks are sitting at roughly 47% playoff odds in the NL West, and they have a hole at the top of the rotation that a 45 FV AA arm is being asked to fill. The org decision tree here is actually more complex than a straight call-up. You can stretch a swingman. You can work a bulk reliever into a hybrid opener role. You can look at external options, trade, waiver claim, free agent remnant. But all of those options cost something. The Egan path costs service time and potentially development runway. A prospect who is rushed and struggles at the major league level loses more than innings. He loses confidence. He loses command feel. And sometimes he loses a tenth of velocity he never fully gets back. Here's what the 40-man looks like from a scout's perspective. Egan is not yet on it. Moving him up forces an addition and a corresponding roster decision. That's not an insurmountable obstacle, but it's a real one, and it adds a layer to the timeline calculation. My comparable for Egan at this stage of development is a lower variance version of what Tyler McGill looked like coming out of AA for the Mets. Fastball first, downhill shape, command in progress. McGill's floor was a serviceable depth arm, his ceiling was a mid-rotation starter. Egan has a similar band. The difference is the downhill quality on Egan's heater is already more advanced at this level than McGill's was. Floor projection for Egan, a fifth starter who gives you 130 innings and pitches to contact with a plus fastball. That's a useful major league arm. Ceiling projection, a mid-rotation starter who sits 94 to 96 with average command and 2 usable secondaries, posting 3 to 3.5 WAR in his peak seasons. The acceleration of his timeline is real. The question is whether Arizona handles it intelligently. The right call is to let Egan face one more month at Double-A, let the command grade breathe, and evaluate a Triple-A assignment as a bridge before the call-up. Rushing him straight from Double-A to a major league rotation spot in late May or early June is the kind of decision that looks aggressive on the surface and costs the org 2 development years on the back end. Watch the command grade over the next 30 days. Watch whether the downhill fastball holds its shape in his 4th and 5th innings. That's your signal. If the 45 command ticks to 50 with consistency in the zone, you have a starter ready for the call. If it stays 45 with occasional wildness, you have an arm that needs one more level before the pressure of a contending rotation. Burns going down is a loss for Arizona, but Egan exists precisely because this kind of loss happens. The question is whether the org respects his development enough to bring him up right. That's the read on the day. Same game, deeper read, back tomorrow. This is Streak Plot Scout. Greatness is never random.